Hey guys, you got Alex from Double Move Sports, and today we're going to do a new segment we call the Fantasy Rewind. So Steph and I always hop on Twitter on Saturday and Sunday leading up to game day, and we like to answer questions, fantasy football questions that you may have. And we're new to this game, so what we try to do is we hop in other discussions, if players are being talked about, if questions are being asked in the fantasy community. We like to go in and leave our opinion, and we're not doing this to try to steal followers, or we're not doing this to try to undermine anybody, but we're doing this just to test and learn, to get used to our process, and to give some input, because I know a lot of these top fantasy analysts are very busy. They're getting hundreds of thousands of questions every week, and Steph and I just want to jump in and provide an educated point of view that takes opportunity, talent, and matchup and turns it into a fantasy prediction. So what we're going to do today is take a look back at some of our tweets from this week and see how did we do. What we want to do is be fully transparent. We want to call out where we were right and take some victory laps, but at the same time, we want to call out where we were wrong and say, why did we choose this player that went wrong? What was our line of thinking? How did we come to an educated conclusion? Just so we can get better and move forward from there. So let's get on Double Move Sports. These haven't been curated or anything. I'm just going to scroll down and try to find some tweets that we had today. Let's see. Here we got Hyde or David Johnson in PPR. We went with Carlos Hyde. That turned out to be a good call. David Johnson actually had 0 points this week. And Carlos Hyde was in a game with a high over-under. The Ravens-Texans, we expected to be a shootout. We said it here. And we thought Hyde could end up getting a goal line touchdown. Turns out he had a breakaway touchdown, but 65 yards and a touchdown for 12.5 fantasy points is not bad. Moving on down, Shane asked the fantasy champions, actually, PPR, Marvin Jones or Mecole Hardman. We chose Marvin Jones. Hardman is extremely boomer bust, and last week he actually had a breakaway touchdown, which salvaged his day. And Jones has stayed productive with Jeff Driscoll. And I was actually a little bit sketched out about Marvin Jones this week, but obviously given this comparison, we went with Marvin. We just thought the talent won out and the usage won out here. He ended up having 4 for 43, which isn't awesome, but he had 2 touchdowns. So looks like Marvin Jones is Driscoll-proof. He's had 2 serviceable fantasy weeks in a row with Driscoll behind center. Next, we jumped in here. Crowder, Samuel, Kirk, James White, or Miles Sanders. Wow, this is a long one. Well, I know Jamison Crowder scored a touchdown today, and we kept him in our look. Jamison Crowder went 5 for 76 and a touchdown, so a very nice game. Who else did we choose? James White. I know that Patriots-Eagles game was a bit messy, but James White ended up getting 20 yards on the ground and then 4 for 16 through the air for 9 points. So that doesn't necessarily kill you. Miles Sanders had 6 fantasy points, 38 yards on the ground, and only 9 yards through the air. So Miles Sanders and James White were a bit sketchy there. Curtis Samuel, I will say, ended up having a pretty tough game. He ended up with 4 for 25 for only 6.5 fantasy points. Christian Kirk ended up having a pretty good day with Kyler Murray being essentially San Francisco proof. He's their kryptonite. Christian Kirk had 6 for 41, so he would have probably been the number 2 guy here, but we picked Jamison Crowder out of that bunch. There's a lot to break down there, so we'll go ahead and move on. Let's see, next we jumped in on a question, Phil Lindsay or Ronald Jones? And Ronald Jones had a tough matchup this week against New Orleans. We thought they might be behind. Agumbawale was going to get a lot of passing work. We thought Peyton Barber could steal some carries. And Ronald Jones ended up having a pretty tough game. Phil Lindsay wasn't necessarily great. He had 16 for 67 and added 2 catches through the air for 9 fantasy points. But Ronald Jones did struggle today. He ended up only having 3 fantasy points, 4 carries for 13 yards, and added 2 catches for 1 yard through the air. So the usage out of Phil Lindsay did win out there. Start 2 full PPR. Brian Hill, John Brown, or Kenyon Drake. This one hurts. We went with Brian Hill and Kenyon Drake. And John Brown is the number 1 scoring player in fantasy this week. So obviously, as guys who are jumping into this industry, it hurts to get one wrong like this. But the blueprint was there for Brian Hill and Kenyon Drake. Brian Hill had 20 touches last week. Carolina rush D is 28th this season. We thought that he would actually have a good game. He did get 16 touches, but he had 2 yards per carry and just struggled offensively. So Brian Hill wasn't great, even though the volume was there like we predicted. Kenyon Drake had an okay game. He had 14 fantasy points, 16 carries for 67 yards, and he had 6 catches. So Kenyon Drake was pretty solid, but John Brown just broke out. I didn't expect them to need him that much this game. I thought they could get up early and then run the ball for most of the remainder. What ended up happening is they did get up early, but it was through John Brown, and then he also got a touchdown late. Next, we got Auden Tate or Deebo Samuel. This one was tough. We knew Deebo was going to step up. We actually did choose Deebo over a lot of guys. Unfortunately, we chose Tate this time. Deebo Samuel had a really nice game. Auden Tate didn't do terrible. He had 4 for 56, but Deebo Samuel played much better. He was clearly featured in this offense. It doesn't seem like Emmanuel Sanders was quite right. And Deebo continues to break out. He had 134 receiving yards in this one. Let's get down a little bit further. Yeah, it looks like we picked Drake a few more times. We picked Brian Hill. We were pretty high on those guys going into the day. Let's just get down into this. We were also big on Mohamed Sanu. That didn't work out. That ended up being a really ugly game. Hollywood Brown obviously didn't work out. All right, let's see. Tight end PPR, Zach Ertz or Jared Cook. We ultimately suggested Ertz in this matchup, and it turns out that was a good thing. He had 18 fantasy points on 9 for 94. But we still had Cook as one of our starts of the week, so we wanted to call that out. And Jared Cook ended up getting 2 for 33 and a touchdown for 11 fantasy points. So you love to see that. Moving on down the list, Kenyon Drake or Todd Gurley in PPR. As we mentioned earlier, Drake had a pretty good game. But Todd Gurley, he's playing right now as of the time of this recording, and he has 18 fantasy points. So he's already outscored Kenyon Drake. So that guaranteed workload there is always a plus. See, Blake asks Mark Ingram or Austin Eckler. We went with Eckler in what should be a shootout in PPR. Given it was PPR, I was lower on Ingram, and oddly enough, he had 2 receiving touchdowns in this game. Mark Ingram hadn't caught a receiving touchdown all season and ended up with 2 here. So I think that's a bit of an anomaly. I think Eckler should still have a good game. Ingram had 23. I think Eckler won't get there, but he could get close. And Ingram only had 48 yards on the ground, so our process was correct there, but he did have an amazing play on that second touchdown as well, so need to give it up to him. Let's see what we got here. Half PPR, need 1. Diggs, Woods, Tyrell Williams. We went with Stephon Diggs. With Thielen being out, should see 6 to 8 targets. Stephon Diggs was able to come through. He had 5 catches for 121 yards and a touchdown. And it was on 5 targets. So he didn't get those 6 to 8 targets, but he was able to turn his opportunity into a really good game. Kirk threw a great deep ball to him in that one. Let's do a couple more. Tyrell Williams or Deebo Samuel. Again, Deebo had a great game, and I don't want to take anything away from him. Did not expect him to go for 130 receiving yards. Tyrell ended up going 4 for 82, so he didn't kill you, but we ultimately were wrong there. Let's see, Woods or Waller. Well, Woods ended up not playing, so Waller obviously was the right pick. Full PPR start 2. Allen Robinson, Stephon Diggs, Deebo Samuel, or David Montgomery. We went with Diggs and Deebo, and they both had 21 fantasy points. So Deebo had 21 fantasy points. Stephon Diggs had 23 fantasy points. As of this recording, we're going into the 4th quarter of this Sunday night game, and Montgomery has 5, and Allen Robinson has 2. So a great pick there. That feels good. We'll do one more. Let's see. Calvin Ridley in a flex. Terry McLaurin or Mark Andrews. We chose Ridley as we knew he would see a big target share with no Mohamed Sanu being traded to New England, no Austin Hooper, and no Devontae Freeman due to injury. And Ridley had his best game of the season, which you love to see. He had 28 fantasy points, 8 for 143, and a touchdown. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching. As you can see, we don't get everything right. As fantasy analysts, if we can get 70% right, even 60% right, then we're doing a great job. Our mindset is just to take the talent, the opportunity, and the matchup and put those 3 things together to gain a point of view on what we can expect from each player each week. So we hope you stick with us. We hope you give us a follow on Twitter, on YouTube, on Instagram, and I hope you check us out on Spotify, Double Move Sports. We do a podcast each week where we'll break down the previous week and give our starts of the week for the upcoming week. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.